Those of you that don't know, the district owns just under 60 acres over on the old Agnews site. And currently we're looking at constructing 3 schools, elementary, middle, and high, that would all be scheduled to open in August of 2019. So my name is Mark Allgaier. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Business Services for the school district. Part of my area of responsibility includes construction. So this evening, to actually do the meat of the presentation will be Larry Adams, who's our Director of Bond Projects. He runs the day-to-day operations of all the construction projects. And Kathy Knavel will do the Ed Services part. She's the Assistant Superintendent for Ed Services. So our Facility Needs Task Force has visited this concept on a number of meetings, as has the District Advisory Team, which is something that Kathy chairs. And it's also been to the board at least twice, if not 3 times. So, and we had presentations recently both at Maine and Montague. So this evening as I said, we have 2 presentations, one from 6 to 7, one from 7 to 8. Couple things that we won't be talking about are future attendance boundaries of the existing schools. We're going to be looking only at the 3-school concept at Agnews. Central Park School is reopening this year in August for the next school year. And just so you know, the school board, which approves any changes to school attendance boundaries, that discussion happened this past fall, and the school board made their final decision, I think it was in December. So we have plenty of time to talk about school attendance boundaries and some of the other associated issues with Agnews. So we'll try and wrap up about 10 minutes to 7. Oh, yes, thank you. So if there are any last minute questions, we have a few minutes before the next group shows up for the 7 o'clock. And we have a translator. Joy, would you introduce yourself?
Good evening. My name is Larry Adams. I'm Director of School Bond Projects. I've been with the Santa Clara Unified School District since 1997, and I was fortunate enough to be involved in the development and construction of this school, and I see some familiar faces in the audience. It's nice to see you again. I'd like to thank Principal Martinez and the staff at Don Calajon for graciously hosting us and setting all this up for us. As you know, a couple years ago, the district acquired title to the Agnews Developmental Center property. It's 55 acres on Zanker Road, and that culminated almost a 10-year process to find new school sites in North San Jose. Some years ago, the city of San Jose embarked on a development process that was a 2-pronged approach for development in the North San Jose area that on one side advanced the development of projects that created jobs, and then on the other side advanced projects that provide the housing for those jobs. So some years ago, the city felt that enough jobs were in the works, in the pipeline, that they could release 8,000 housing units for development. And as of today, almost all of those 8,000 units have been constructed and are either leased or are in the process of being leased now. And currently we have no schools in the North San Jose area to serve those new housing units. So in early 2011, the school board adopted an environmental impact report for new schools on the Agnews campus. That environmental impact report anticipated a school of 1,800 students, roughly 1,000 in grades kindergarten through 8th grade, and I believe it's 1,800 in the high school grades. So we've been working for the last couple of years on environmental cleanup and all of the mitigation measures we need to do on those 55 acres in order to be able to begin construction. And we're at the point now where we're ready to engage architects and design consultants to actually design the schools. And the critical issue that came up was, what is the grade configuration of those schools? There was some people within the district that felt that a commitment was made to the community to build a K-8 school and a high school. Other people felt that there was a commitment made to build 3 schools, an elementary, a middle, and a high school. So obviously, we're not going to go very far down the road with design without resolving that issue. So we made, staff put together some ideas. We made some assumptions on how many students that school would need to accommodate at the beginning, and then presented 2 options for grade configurations. Mark, could you go to the next slide, please? So there we are, 2 schools versus 3 schools. Next slide. So we built a series of assumptions, and at this stage, we have a series of assumptions, some of them built on other assumptions, in order to come up with sort of a baseline or an idea of what that school might look like. And the analogy I use is, if we were to snap our fingers today and be able to make those schools appear today and populated them with the students that we know live in the attendance areas north of 101, what would those schools look like? So starting with an elementary school, we assumed that we assumed a school of 5 classes of each grade level, 1 TK, and then 5 kindergarten through 5th grades. And we assumed that they would be staffed or loaded at 24-to-1, 24 students per teacher in each grade level. And that gives us a school, theoretically, a maximum of 456 students. So that's our assumption for, now where those students would come from, we don't know yet. We haven't begun to look at attendance boundaries for that school. Middle schools, currently, grades 6 through 8, students who live in north of the 101 attendance area, we have 886 students. In the Don Calajan area, we have 169. And then 6 through 8 students not in the Don Calajan area, the balance is 717. High school, our current, all of the students living in the attendance areas north of 101, total 958 students. And those are students who are currently going to either Wilcox or Santa Clara high schools. We have some students that go to New Valley Alternative High, the Gateway program, but we didn't include those numbers in this calculation. So then going to the next slide. So if we populated those schools with the assumption that Don Calajan would continue as a K-8 school, you can see that the grade level configuration in 2 scenarios. The top one is 3 schools, the bottom one is 2 schools. So in the 3-school scenario, we have an elementary of 456, we have a middle school of 717, and a high school of 958, so a total enrollment of 2,131 students. In the 2-school scenario, the K-8 would be 1,173 students. High school would remain the same at 958, and the total stays the same at 2,131. Now, I would call your attention to under the 2-school scenario, where the red double arrow, you can see that in 5th grade, the K-8 cohort of 72 kids leaves 5th grade and goes into a 6th grade of 220 kids. Now going to a second scenario where Don Calajan, this is theoretically, this is not a proposal in any stretch of the imagination, but if Don Calajan were to become a K-5, in this case, all of the middle school students living north of 101 would go to the Don Calajan Middle School. And in the 3-school scenario, elementary 456, the middle school goes up to 886, high school again at 958. In the two-school scenario, the K-8 school goes up to 1,342 students, and then the high school again at 958. So again, looking at the arrow, you can see the transition from 5th to 6th grade. That cohort of K-8 goes into a larger class size or a larger cohort size in 6th grade. So that's my facility piece of the discussion. I'd like to introduce Kathy Knavel. Kathy is the Assistant Superintendent for Educational Services and has many, many years of experience within the district.
And I too recognize some of you out there that got to spend time with planning Calajon, so it's fun to be here. So when the first presentation was made to the board from the Facilities Needs Task Force, the board asked that we look at the two possibilities from an educational standpoint. And they asked that my educational services team, which includes special education, health and wellness, attendance and discipline, and all of curriculum and instruction, English learner and supplemental programs, that we look at it as a team from an educational viewpoint and give recommendations about the 2 versus 3 schools. Also, the board asked that the District Advisory Committee look at it, and the District Advisory Committee is a group of volunteer parents, staff, community members, students, teachers that come together and have a few roles. They oversee our LCAP process, and they also give recommendations to projects such as this when there are questions in the district. So those two committees, both my educational services team and the District Advisory Committee, I brought the question to them about 2 schools versus 3 schools at Agnews. And so some of the things that we looked at, and I think it's probably the next slide, Mark. That's okay. First of all, we talked about the characteristics of a K-8. And I know some of you are very familiar being here at Calajon. What I did do is research some very successful K-8s in not only this area, but also nationally. And so some of those characteristics would be that students start at TK or kindergarten and follow all the way through 8th grade as a cohort, as Larry was explaining in the numbers previous. Also, K-8 programs are typically not as large as a middle school. Our middle schools are relatively on the small side, actually, at 1,000 to 1,100 students. And you would want a K-8 to stay under that, really. And you saw with the numbers previously that having a K-8, that K-8 could potentially be 1,300 students. So that was another thing for us as we were looking at the characteristics. The schedules in successful K-8s tend to be more like elementary schedules. There's typically not always separation by content areas and periods defined. Oftentimes you'll see K-8s where there's a multi-subject credential teaching 7th and 8th grade, and the students may be pulled out and regrouped for science and math. That's a model that I've seen, and that were listed in some of the model K-8s around. The trade-off when you have a K-8, a true K-8, or a K-8 where you have all those grade levels and a smaller 6-8, is that there isn't the ability to have as many elective programs and have as many extracurricular activities. So that was something we looked at. And then the last thing is that it seemed that even locally, there's some very local K-8 schools. The K-8 schools seemed most successful when they were grown from the ground up, from the parents and the community that said, hey, let's try this K-8 approach and let's build it together. Because you do, as you can see from the characteristics, there's some things you give up for your students. So both committees looked at these sort of characteristics of a K-8, And then really looked, Mark, can you go to the next slide? Okay. And then really looked to see what as committees do we think would be the best. So out of both committees, we did secret anonymous votes. And for the educational services team, we really determined unanimously that we should be building the 3 schools from an educational standpoint. And the district advisory committee was 12-2 of the voting members in favor of 3 schools. And here are some of the reasons for the recommendations. We will have equitable course offerings with extracurricular and activities as compared with our other middle schools that we have now, which is something that we sometimes hear from Calajon folks, is the offerings aren't quite as robust because you have a smaller class size. Opportunities of students north of 101 to attend a middle school here instead of being on a bus and going all the way across town for an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. Middle schools from all of our north of 101 schools would have that opportunity to have a school nearby. In essence, building that community on this side of 101. Because the 3 schools will be on the same property, there really is that ability to build a K-12 community there, because students and all of the students on this side of 101 have that opportunity to be involved in that community K through 12, and maybe some 6 through 12, but still building that community as you go up. So we felt that was a strong point. And then one of the other things that we wrestle with is that teachers often are pulled in different directions for professional development. We do tend to separate our middle school and high school teachers into their content areas when we do trainings for them. And our elementary, because they teach all subjects, they get grouped all together or by grade level. So we felt that the 3 schools would give us that opportunity. And I know we're here at Calajon and that's a struggle here, and we're looking at ways to allow for some time for the K-8 community to be together on our professional development days, because we realize that is a struggle. So in conclusion, both committees gave recommendation back to the Facilities Needs Task Force to recommend the 3 schools, a K-5, a 6-8, and a 9-12 on the Agnews property. Questions?
So I'm not familiar with the mechanics of why the 2 structures were different. What about a combined school prevents you from having the same activities? What about a combined school prevents the structuring of teachers from moving the way you were talking about?
Good question. Let me explain a little further. The first question about the opportunities and the extracurriculars. When you have, and this is master schedule, meaning you have so many students and so many teachers, so you have basically, let's say 30 students per teacher that you're given, and when there's less students, there's less room for those elective teachers. So you have your core teachers. You're going to have math, English, social studies, and science. So that's 4 teachers and say 120 students, okay? At a bit larger school, you may have way more students, which gives you way more staff and the ability to have more electives in your elective range. So you might have art, and one of our middle schools has wood shop. We have culinary. So their larger population of students gives you larger staffing numbers, just based on numbers. It's all about the numbers. And then with regard to the teachers, so we have 8 days of professional development. We're very fortunate to have that, where teachers come together and learn about teaching. And typically, our K-5 teachers are together, and they're broken up by grade level. So the kindergarten teachers across the district get together and are trained on math or whatever is the most pressing for the kindergarten teachers, and that goes K through 5. But when we get to 6th grade, we actually group them by content area. So the math teachers from all across the district get together, and the social studies teachers and the elective teachers, and they do K-12, they get together. So our 6th grade math teachers are with our high school math teachers. What that creates is the schedules are different, and so for a K-8 staff to be together on some of those days has been nearly impossible, because K-5 are going one direction to different part of the district, and their schedule may be broken up differently, and our 6-12 teachers are going another place. And so there's never, there hasn't been enough time for them to be together and learn together as a staff, which is really important for building the camaraderie that you need on a staff to move your students forward. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you, Kathy. Back to the facilities perspective for a moment. In discussions with the Facility Needs Task Force, it became clear that the consensus was the recommendation for 3 schools. And in discussing that consensus, it became clear to me that the expectation was that those would be 3 independent schools. They would, anything that you would find a functional capability on any of our elementary, middles, and high schools, you would find here as well. So then the question came up, is our 55 acres big enough to house all 3 of those schools? And that was a real concern, particularly among the people involved in fields, outdoor sports, athletics, and physical education. So we solicited comments from district PE staff on what they thought were their requirements for outdoor facilities for each of those 3 schools. And then we worked with an architect to do some conceptual layouts to see if in fact we could fit them on the campus, and if there was any flexibility in the design for 3 independent schools on the campus. And what we came up with was we looked at schools across the United States that combined middle and elementaries, middles and high schools, to disclose my prejudice, from a pure facilities economics point of view, the more we can condense the buildings together and share common utility cores and things like that, the more our funds will go. But yet we have to balance that with the optimal operation of those 3 schools across transitional kindergarten all the way up through 12th grade. So I'm going to show you some conceptual designs here. I need to emphasize they're conceptual. I can pretty much guarantee you that the schools will not look like these. These were only for the purpose of assuring ourselves that we could fit 3 schools on the campus. So the first one, Mark, could you go back? Let me just set this up a little bit. Across the bottom of the screen is Zanker Road. I had a laser somewhere here. We have Zanker Road across the bottom, Center Road up the side, and this the Cisco campus is on this side of the road. This area up here is the city park. The total Agnews property was 81 acres. The district purchased 55 acres, and then the city, in a joint proposal to the state, purchased the remaining 20-some acres, and that will be developed as a city park. There's a road that comes up the back, but the primary access is going to be off of Zanker Road. There are high voltage electrical transmission lines on Zanker Road, and we have to maintain a 100-foot buffer along those lines, so we can't have any buildings or playgrounds or field space within that 100-foot buffer. So here's some concepts. This concept shows the elementary school on the north end, the middle school just a little north of center, the stadium, football, soccer stadium in the middle, and the high school on the lower south end. One advantage of this is we have this area back here that lends itself to field space. It's not an efficient location for buildings because it's hard to get into and out of. We think that the major parking pickup and drop-off area will be parallel to Zanker Road. So in this case, the middle school is somewhat adjacent to the elementary school. But again, there are 3 separate schools, and these facilities are designed for use by each of the schools. Next. In this scenario, the elementary school is on the south end. The high school is somewhat up to the north. We have a middle school probably more adjacent to the high school than the elementary school, and then the fields around the perimeter. In some of these scenarios, we were looking at parking lots within the campus. In some cases, they could even be parking structures for teachers and staff. Next one. In this case, we merged the middle school and the high school into one building. This is not to mean that those students would interact with each other in any way. It's just an economical way to build a building where you can combine facilities and gain some economic benefits of that. Kathy talked about some of the opportunities for high school resources being made available to middle school students, but don't confuse this with saying that the middle school and the high school students would be together in any way. And is there another one, Mark? Nope, that was the last one. So questions, comments?